thoughts, but he is going to stay in the apologetics arena with us here. So we're going to try and wrap up this lesson that we've been talking about here about the existence of God. We had been kind of concluding that idea. We had talked about the ideas of matter and mind and the concepts that we had there that we were talking about as to which one was eternal, and we came down to that conclusion that since we've determined through, even the scientists believe that matter is not eternal, that mind must be that thing that was eternal, and of course we believe that that's the God of the Bible and that explanation. But as we're going through this existence of God, we're going through some ideas and some discussions about some other things that help us to appreciate that, and we started talking about the design of that is something that we referenced Hebrews and that concept here that every house has a builder and God is the builder of everything, the creator of everything, and that concept. So we started talking about the things that we can look at in design. We started talking about the universe, okay? And the universe, and I said, was it planned or accidental? We decided it was planned, okay? When you start looking at the details about that, and I mentioned the ideas of the things, when we launch something into space, we launch it towards where whatever we want to target or whatever we want to see is going to be, right? Because it's all moving. And so we have to know, and again, because of the laws that God put in place regarding the movement of all of the things within the universe, as well as the laws of mathematics that we have the minds to be able to understand, they can calculate and be able to know where the moon's going to be when they launch something to be able to be there. Or even the things that we've got out there orbiting that continue to take pictures that are out there in the universe, so many of those things. Also mentioned the idea of solar and lunar eclipses. We know, and you can look that up. If you wanted to know when the next one of those was, you could just Google that, right? And it's going to tell you when the next one was based on the predictions. And guess what? Have they been wrong? No. Why are they able to calculate that? Because God put this stuff in perfect precision, that it happens consistently. You know, anything else that we design, yes, we want it to work consistently, and it will for a while, but what starts happening? Mechanical things that we put into practice start breaking down. So the universe is a great explanation for how everything works. It's interesting that they quote in this particular section, they talk about physicists, and physics is one of those things. They say the universe mysteriously, the word they use, operates on mathematical principles, which is what I've already mentioned here. They call it mystery, or a mystery that it does. And it's like, no, mathematics is just as foundational as the creation of the things that are actually described. When you start describing the 6 days of creation, mathematics was a part of that. Because when you started putting the sun, moon, and stars in the sky, guess what? The math had to go along with that because it had to work within the laws of everything that God had put in place. If I said the name Einstein, what would you say? Genius. Theory of what? Relativity. Okay, I thought that's what I heard somebody say. When you think about Einstein, and just, we say genius and we think of that, and obviously he's above my intellect, but that idea, what did he actually discover? We say the theory of relativity, but what was he using? What made him be able to discover something that we use even at this point in time that they believe is still, again, it's one of those theories, but it hasn't been disproven, and so some of these theories still stand in place. But why is that possible? Again, it's the laws that they will call the laws of nature, the laws of science, again, but it all goes back to God. Whether you call those, and again, there's terms that I don't like used that people will use involved in this. They'll say, "Well, Mother Nature," and that's it. Well, no, let's give God the credit because God's the one that did it. Any of those mathematic things that they're going to be able to come up with and discover and understand from the physics side of this, It's all because God put these things in perfect precision and that we can understand that. There was an astronomer, Sir James Jeans, who declared the universe looks more like a great thought than a great machine. We discovered that the universe shows evidence of a design or a controlling power that has something in common with our own minds. Okay? Now again, that's an astronomer who spent his life looking at all of the things in our universe. And what is he trying to say?
Something that taught me is to see something. Made us obviously you have eyes. So God thought that in order for me to be able to see something, we need the sun to be there.
So, we can appreciate the fact that God put him there, and we can see these things, and we wouldn't understand it except for the revelation of God as to exactly how that happened. But as they look at it from just a you might call it clinical or a scientific perspective, they don't want to use the terms that would help us explain God or help us understand that it is God. And the only way we know that it truly is God is because he told us. We'd be in the dark as well if we didn't have the revelation of God, and isn't that a blessing that we do? God didn't want us to be completely in the dark. Now, would there be this would be the kind of evidence that we'd just be standing around discussing and not knowing exactly who God was, but God has revealed himself to us, and that's the depth that we can understand him is so great because of what he's revealed. But the universe and the solar system, the universe help us to understand that. But they use things like a controlling power. But he says it's also similar to our own minds. What's interesting about the universe as well is it's designed in a way that's in some ways more complex because it took us a long time to figure it out such that we could do what we've done in outer space, to be able to travel there and with the mathematical predictions that it takes. I don't know if you've seen some of those movies and how many people that sit in a room and the ones how they did that before. What was that movie recently with the people they were called mathematicians? What was that?
Hidden Figures, no?
Yes, Hidden Figures. That was the one where they had people literally sitting there, doing math on paper all day long to help them predict and figure out how that they could do these things with NASA and launch the things that they were trying to do. I don't remember the specifics of what they were doing.
I've always thought that
He's holding a microphone. Since y'all can't hear that he is.
Okay. I was going to say, I've always thought that no one goes to sleep holding a flashlight, not expecting the sun to come back up the next day. No one does that. But when you go into biostatistics and these other statistical things, it's very abnormal to see things work consistently. It's not normal to see things work consistently. And so sometimes just because we have the expectation to breathe in and have oxygen there when we do it consistently, just when you get into that type of statistical analysis and physics, there's certain things that just don't happen consistently, but God makes these things happen. Like you're saying, he's reliable, he's consistent all the time.
Yeah, it is amazing. And again, I think the predictability of it that happens like that is something that is supposed to continue to fortify our belief in God. Yes, it's great to have the revelation, and that's even more valuable because we understand the plan that he made to redeem us and what it means to what we're going to have after this life. But again, people want to dismiss all of this evidence. It's like there's got to be a God, and this defines how powerful this God is to set things in place that don't change, that can be in existence from the beginning of time until now, and it's consistent. Jay.
To add on to what Nathan was saying, it's always amazing that when man is not in control of it or hasn't made it, then it must not be possible. I was thinking about when you're talking about the consistency of God, how we can always count on him with everything that he's made. At least that's what I heard you saying. You probably said all those words. But I was thinking about how I found out about the currents in the ocean. I could have read the book of Job first, but I've learned it on Finding Nemo. And then, you can tell like all the different currents that are there, right? And it's amazing. But what's even more amazing is that in the time that we spent in Alaska, we truly saw how God has set nature up. Every year, there are 5 types of salmon that are going to come consistently through the same rivers. And you can count on the salmon coming through. So if you're hungry, you just wait for that time of the year and you can, do subsistent fishing. But you were talking about the sunrise and things like that. This winter solstice and the summer solstice that happen, you see that every year on the same day, twice a year, that is, on June 21st and December 21st. Both of those happen just as God has set it up. And so when man can't explain it, I wasn't in here Sunday morning, but I remember Wednesday night, man makes it up so that they can make them feel better.
Yeah, they make up a lot of things to do. And when you come back to the actual evidence that the scientists have, it's not like we've actually on our own. We appreciate some of these things, but we've read and trust the scientists. And again, it's because God put it before us, and He also put us with minds that we can understand it. And as we understand more and more, it actually should be drawing us closer and closer to God, because we just understand the depth of it and go, this couldn't have been an accident. This has to be a plan. This chapter continues on. It goes from the universe to just talking about our own solar system. And we say the word Earth, what comes to your mind? Thinking in this realm of thinking, what's the Earth? Ken has already learned the planets, and she loves to sing about the planets, okay? And the particular song she learned, of course, technically leaves it at 8 planets. They leave Pluto in the song, but they say, but not Pluto. So they kick Pluto out as a planet, but there's 8 planets. But of all the 8 planets that we call planets now, which one do we live on? Earth. There's only one with its atmosphere. Everything was set up to maintain the ability for animals and humans to live in. So the Earth is a perfect planet created by God for the habitation by man that He created as well. So it's just remarkable that everything that's here, and it's not everything was created that works in a cycle as well. And you could get into so many different cycles that exist within the universe, the world that we live in, being the Earth. How far is it from the sun?
93 million miles away.
93 million miles from the Earth to the sun. Okay? That was an accident. 93 million. How do you pick 93 million? I mean, the reason it was picked is because it's the right distance, right? And who knew that? The one who planned and created it and set it in place. 93 million, And again, when you look, it's amazing to think about, too, that you look and you think, I can see that. I see it every day it rises. I know that it's up there, and it's 93 million miles away. How long did it take you to get to the sun? If you got in a car when you were born and drove 60 miles an hour, you wouldn't get there in your lifetime. No, you'd have to live to be 177 years to drive to the sun. Of course, that's why we would take something faster than that if we were going to go to the sun. But we know we couldn't even do that because of what the sun is. And again, being 93 million miles away from the Earth is perfect because it's just the right temperature here, isn't it? Yes, there's cold places like Alaska. There's parts of the world that are colder, but still, you with the right adaptations, you can live on this Earth pretty much in any portion of it because it's set the right distance from the sun. The sun, okay, the Earth travels around the sun, okay? Is it a consistent or a non-consistent rate? Jack?
I was going to mention something about that God particle that they called it. Just real quick, I'll read it. Said finding the Higgs like boson validates much of how scientists believe the universe was formed. The media calls the Higgs boson the God particle, because according to the theory laid out by Scottish physicist Peter Higgs and others in 1964, it's the physical proof in an invisible universe-wide field that gave mass to all matter right after the Big Bang, forcing particles to coalesce into stars, planets, and everything else.
Yeah, it's interesting that they can do such explanation and again have the mind and be able to research to figure that out, but then they throw in there, yeah, but we're going to think it happened out of an explosion, which is just, they have some...
Scientists have a name for our planet, or planets that fall below, the accidental right range. It's the Goldilocks planet, and that's because it's not too hot, not too cold, for water. So
The Goldilocks.
they can't handle the truth that God made it in the right way.
So they make up little terms, okay, coming out of nursery or tales or things like that. So, but the Earth travels around the sun, okay? Is it a consistent rate or an inconsistent rate? It's actually not consistent, okay? I would have probably said it was consistent, and I'm not one that perfectly, because it's actually when you get closer, we move faster. When we're further away, we move slower. It's some difference there. But again, you would think it would be consistent, but even within that inconsistency, it's a perfect inconsistent, or not constant, not inconsistency. It's consistent, but it's not constant, would be the way that should be stated. It also rotates on its axis. At the equator, how fast is it moving? You've probably heard these numbers before. How fast is the Earth moving at the equator? Just right. Okay? 1,000 miles an hour. That's kind of crazy to think about, isn't it? It's hard to believe right now that we're sitting on a planet that's moving, right? We know it is. We've been told it is, and even the scientists, they're the ones that are telling us, the ones that don't believe those kind of things, that it's actually moving. Moving, though, 1,000 miles an hour, okay? So accurate, they say, a variation of 1 second in a century would upset all the astronomical calculations, okay? It would change everything just by 1 second if it moved at a difference. But no, it doesn't. It's been consistent. God keeps it moving on its own axis, okay? Which is another thing. It's like its own axis, okay? How does that happen? Just happen. The planet accidentally happened, but then it started spinning just on its own axis, which is not connected to anything. It's just, you just go on, and the further you think about it, the details here, okay? The Earth covered 3/4 with water, okay? What is important and why has that happened? Anybody know why is it important, or why does it need to be that way? That 3/4 of this planet is covered with water. We need water to live, okay? So it is part of the water cycle, okay? The oceans have what in them? Okay? Salt, which enables the whole water cycle to happen, clouds and rain to form the atmosphere. But also, it doesn't doesn't become too acidic or too alkaline, being an acid or a base. It doesn't change. This cycle consistently happens as a part of that. But the other part about water is the fact that it doesn't change temperature as quickly, right? Water doesn't change temperature. Have you ever been to a swimming pool and you go out and suddenly it's 80 degrees outside and you think, oh, it's a great day to go swimming. You jump in the pool and what's up? No, you need a couple long 80-degree days because the water doesn't change that quickly. And that's one of the things good about the planet. With that much water, if it were all land, guess what? The temperature would change too fast. So God knew what he was doing. He created it with 75% water around it, and that helps to maintain the temperature on the planet the way that he wanted it to be to sustain that. The atmosphere, okay, exerts 15 pounds per square inch on the Earth's surface, okay? 15 pounds per square inch, okay? On an average human, how much is that? Anybody know? I know you're probably doing that math in your head real quickly. The surface area of the body, square inches of that, of the human body. 30,000 pounds upon the human body. Think about 30,000 pounds on the human body. But that's what's happening to us right now. Scientists are the one that told us that. 30,000 pounds. Okay, if it were not designed for such an environment, what would happen? you would just disintegrate. You know, we weren't designed that way, but we were designed for the pressure that's exerted on us. So our earth is an amazing place, and again, it speaks to God creating it for us to be able to live in. We go further, though, as we're talking, I mentioned there at the very end about the human body. Human body, Psalm 139:14, I praise you for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Okay? You know, when you read that psalm, first of all, when was that written? I didn't ask for an exact date. That's, you know, it was a long time ago, right? Before we understood the modern medical science that we know today, you know, it's easy to stand here today and, you know, we can name so many body systems, you know, from the circulatory to the circulatory system to the endocrine system, and, you know, you just go on through all the body systems that work together. That's science we've learned in thousands of years. But we're talking back here. He recognized that when that song was written, he could tell. You can just look at your body. You just know it because you can use it. This is wonderfully made. You know, you have to appreciate what God's given each one of us to be able to do things when you think about it. What He's given us. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 18. But as it is, God arranged the members of the body, each one of them, as He chose. Now it's interesting, that verse is not really talking about the human body, okay? But that analogy in 1 Corinthians chapter 12 is talking about the body being what? The church. But when it goes deep into that analogy, it actually uses the human body to help us understand it. And it starts talking about the body. And what does it tell us about the body? If one part hurts, what's the other part do? Everything hurts. So it uses such a wonderful analogy about our own human bodies that we understand to help us understand how we're supposed to work together in the church and how important it is. And it tells us, though, in that same context, it says, the eye can't say, I don't have any need for the ear. And it's just this part saying, you know, is any part of your body telling it, I don't need the rest of it? No. If it is, what do? You go to the doctor and say, I need to fix that. Because my body needs to all work together. It's trying to work together. And that's kind of that analogy. But it goes back to just the understanding of our human body, that God not only gave it to us in such a designed way that we use it, but also we can understand it and use that wonderful design then to even help us understand something that's very important to Him. As He came and sent His Son to sacrifice for the church, we can understand that. The body's made up of multi-trillion number of cells. Cells, that's important just to think about. Each cell has hundreds of thousands of genes present. Each gene contains DNA, complicated code for mapping out their entire development of an individual. Single human cell contains, if you put the code down in English, it would fill a 1,000 volume encyclopedia. That's amazing, isn't it? You know, because when we had encyclopedias, we only had how many volumes? 26, right? One for each letter, okay? Most of us in here understand what an encyclopedia is. There's a couple that might not know. What is an encyclopedia? That's right. That was Googling books. And it was limited then. It was very limited. But just think about that amount of code that we've got in our body to help it generate the code that we need to sustain the cells, the process, everything that goes on. The total DNA of the body estimated would span the solar system. Is that amazing? When we think about it. And that's, God's compacted that down in the cells within our bodies. Each one has this information, okay? And it's a design process of replication that allows life to be passed on with continuity, okay? It's the language of life. Scientists, one director of probability in biology, says by the rules of reason, okay? Code without a coder, okay? You know, when we think about nowadays, there's a lot of things talking about code, right? People write code. David writes code, don't you? Not really? No, he doesn't. Okay. If he has to. He understands he doesn't want to. But code, within the context of computers, write code. And when people see that computer doing something, we know there's something behind it, right? Code behind it. Well, if the body's doing something and functioning better than a computer does, right? Guess what? There should be a coder, just as we would think with that logical side of us, so we understand it. It requires intelligence and a person behind it. There's an evolutionist. He said DNA functioning complexity. Said most sweeping evolutionary questions at the level of biochemical genetics are still unanswered. Okay? Even with all we know today, this particular person saying there's just so much that we don't know. Again, about how life continues on. Of course, we haven't been, no one in science has been able to create life. The evolutionist also concedes that they're not, if it were not for their evolutionary bias, he said this puzzle would have been interpreted as the most powerful sort of evidence for special creation. What did he say there? He said the evidence means there's plenty of evidence. Most powerful sort of evidence for special creation. Well, what did he say the problem was? They don't like it. They have a bias, okay? You ever run into anybody like that? You can tell them something and they're so biased against whatever, even if you've given them information. It's what these scientists are saying. If we didn't have this bias, if we didn't have to believe in evolution, if we didn't have to try and keep this theory, then it'd be a perfect thing to just say, this requires a special creator. That's what the evidence, that's what he's saying. And it's interesting that they use these type of quotes to support this materials, because these aren't, it's just not a preacher saying, again, this information is that important. These are scientists that value the information to that level. But they're still thinking that there's something else they're going to learn that's going to help them prove this other theory of evolution, which isn't going to happen. All right. Continue with the body. All the systems that we mentioned. How many systems are there in the body? I don't know. I didn't write that down. But you're listing of them. Skin, skeletal, muscular, digestive, circulatory, respiratory, excretory, nervous system, reproductive system, endocrine system. Those are a lot of them, the major ones, okay? And first of all, when you think of any one of those, what's amazing about it? Everything. And then you think about all of those. What did I have? About 10 there that were listed. Not only do they work, they call it a system because it's doing its own part of the process within the body, but then they're all integrated together. Okay? Which is just amazing. Somebody makes one thing and then you want to integrate it with something else. What's the challenge? It's very complicated when you start trying to integrate things, okay? Just take two people, right? You try and integrate two people, two people work together, right? It's a challenge. Then you start talking about 10 systems working independently, but now they've got to also work together. No, that was an accident. That just happened. So when you look at the systems, you can look at each one in depth, but there's so much. They've got to all be designed. They used right here is where they threw in Bill's analogy of the Boeing 747. 4 million non-flying parts, okay, are organized and creatively designed into a flying plane, right? 4 million parts. Is that right, Steve? You count them? You never counted them? He worked on planes a lot, so I thought he might know, but you trust that there's probably 4 million parts? Thereabouts, okay. A lot of parts. No one is going to say, let's just take those 4 million parts and they're going to accidentally work, okay? Even when you're trying to put them together, I imagine you had problems, didn't you? A mechanic working on the plane, knowing what the parts are supposed to do, trying to get them together to function properly together to make it flying, and guess what they do all the time? They go back and figure it out and work on it again and again. You don't want to get on a plane and have it checked over and over again. Getting those parts to work together. But the human body got a lot more parts than that when you start looking at it, and they all function together. The brain. What does our brain do? It regulates everything. How often do you think about your brain? You recognize that humans are the only ones that do think about their brain, right? All the other animals in the they don't think about their brain. Okay, now they have one, and it does function the way it needs to for them. Okay, but they don't think about it. We can think about our brain. Our brain does things for us involuntary, right? What is your brain doing for you right now? Breathing. Okay, it's keeping your heart beating. Okay, it's got things that it's doing. Ashton, so you have.
The brain controls the whole body. And without us even thinking, it's working. But when we look at what man is able to do, man is able to mass produce things. God has made billions of people, and no two are alike. There is no mass production. God is concerned, each individual. It's amazing.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's good to stop and look at what God's created and the individuality of individuals, but also then the uniqueness of the body and the brain and how all these things work. Because again, good to know so we can try and take care of our bodies and systems and all that's going on, and try and be healthy and live a long life in the service for the Lord. But it's just good to help us understand God too in that process, when we have an appreciation for it. But no matter how good the body seems to be working, it's also doing what? It is also breaking down, okay? It is a system that does work together most of the time pretty well. But again, if you stop some of those systems for maybe involuntary reasons to you, going back to some of our discussions of suffering, if something happens to you traumatic to your body and some of your systems stop working, your body will die. And God made a plan for that as well. And that's not the topic of our lesson, but again, we can appreciate our bodies do work in such a way, but there's things that can stop it from working, okay? And we can even try to stop it from working, because we're talking about the brain, we're saying we're breathing without thinking about it. But then if you think about it, what can you do? You can hold your breath. You can stop yourself from breathing. How long?
Not very long.
Not very long. Somebody right now is going, I can hold mine for this long. I can hold it longer. Anybody else in the room, right? You ever challenge somebody like that? I can hold it for, seems like a lot longer when you start doing it, right? You start holding your breath. But you hold your breath, and what does your body do at some point? You can hold your breath long enough. Children have done it. Adults have done it too, probably. And you pass out, and what happens? You start breathing again. That's right. And you realize that wasn't a smart thought. Let me stop thinking, and I'll be better off. It's kind of interesting when we think about our brain that way. We can think, when we think sometimes, we actually do negative things to ourselves. And then we stop thinking, and the body actually does better for us, right? Isn't that how anxiety works? We start thinking about things too much, and then if we can get that stop thinking about it, well, guess what? Maybe our blood pressure goes down, our heart rate goes down, and our body goes back to when we're not thinking. Our brain regulates things in such a way. So it's interesting to think about how that works. Isaac Asimov, which is the scientist's name you might that was mentioned in this particular section, said that man's brain is the most complex and orderly arrangement of matter in the universe. I would have to agree. It seems like it's, and it's just interesting when you think about what we've studied the brain, but at the end of the day, we kind of, some people would just call the brain, it's just gray matter is what they'll say. But it's pretty powerful gray matter, is it not? All that it can do to sustain our lives. Richard Dawkins, an atheist at Oxford, he wanted to argue that the universe is without design. He said, in spite of that, when discussing certain characteristics of the brain, he conceded the complexity of living organisms is matched by the elegant efficacy of their apparent design. If anyone does not agree that this amount of complex design cries out for explanation, I give up. Okay? What was he saying there? I could read it again. Basically what he was saying here, the complexity of all this stuff, okay? elegant efficiency, apparent design. But then he comes down with a statement. If anyone doesn't agree that this amount of complex design cries out for what? Cries out for an explanation. Okay? There's certain things that you got to go, well, got to have a way to explain that. It goes back to where we may have started here, the cause and effect. We're looking at something that's so complex, so organized. You've got to ask, how did that happen? What's the explanation? You've got to ask that question. And I think what he's implying in this is, what do scientists do?
Hypothesize.
They hypothesize, okay, come up with what would seem to be very poor explanations when you start looking at cause and effect, okay, because of what we're looking at in the design and the complexity, the cause that they're given doesn't seem adequate, okay, as we describe that law. It's got to be adequate to think about it. You know, the complexity of it, anytime you see something complex, you're going to think the creator is what? More complex than the creation is the way you're going to look at it. You're going to say, whoever created this has got to be a genius, got to be a master of whatever it is. But that's the way you think. That's the way it is. That's an adequate cause. And that's what he's sort of saying here. But scientists will stop and go, well, you know, it could be caused by this. And you're like, really? I mean, how do you come up with it? This is not at all adequate. But that's where they'll stop. Or they'll just sort of stop with going, I don't know. And I don't really care. Or I don't need an explanation for it. No, he's kind of pushing them to this point. He says, you got to have an explanation for this. No reason that you should be able to get away with that. The brain does voluntary and involuntary things that we've already mentioned. Sir Julian Huxley, evolutionist, he says, the miracle of the mind is that it can transmute quantity into quality. This property of the mind is something given. It is just so. It cannot be explained. It can only be accepted. There is no explanation when God is ruled out. Okay? What is he trying to tell us about the mind? Quantity into quality. What is he saying? Josh.
He's saying, oh, sorry, I actually had raised my hand right before you said that, so I apologize.
So you want to previously comment and not answer that question?
The comment kind of is relative to the question. I was just going to say how, interestingly enough, there's a significantly higher percentage of biologists, chemists, physicists, of scientists who work in the physical world and with human bodies and doctors, etc., who do believe that there is some kind of creator. I'm not saying we'll see them on the pew next to us, but sometimes we do. And many of them do believe that there is a God. There's a lot less of that in the realms of psychology and sociology and the social sciences. And it's just interesting how the design of the world all around of us, as these quotes that you're reading from these verified scientists, it's just, it's humbling to witness how, after all of our technology, we can't make anything as simple as a blade of grass. And just how we're completely outclassed.
Absolutely. And again, I think that's so much to speak to God's the way He's created things, that it speaks of Him. Everything that we look at and the design about that. And what he's talking about here in this particular quote about the brain is that the quantity, as we can turn the quantity of the thought processes that we do, when we continue to think about things, we learn. And out of that becomes something that's quality, right? And that's going to be the same thing we're going to see about God, and the understanding that the amount of thought that He put into everything, that's why we're created so amazingly. The world, the universe, everything that we've discussed is so much because God put a lot of thought into it as the creator. He did. And we appreciate that we think through these types of things. So it's very important when we look at this. Last section we want to touch on before we wrap up this particular chapter is the idea of morality. Okay? So we're talking about the existence of God, and we've talked about cause and effect. We've talked about the idea of the design, demanding the designer, and the complexity of the design, even helping us to understand how complex that the Creator must be in that process. But when you get into this, the concept of morality, he says, we start talking about the conscience and thinking about the conscience. And what will we say the conscience is? What's the conscience?
The little voice in you beside you that tells you what's right and wrong.
Okay? The conscience is that quality of the mind that either accuses or excuses human conduct. Okay? That part of your mind that says, that's okay, excuses it, or accuses it, meaning, that's not okay. So it looks at that behavior. You're looking at behavior and going, okay, should I do that? Should I have done that? Looking at behavior past tense and saying whether or not I should or not, but you can look at that in future. So it says the conscience does not determine what is moral or immoral, okay? It's just sort of guiding you in that process. It recognizes the existence of morality, okay? We mentioned already that idea of things that might be innately put into man, and talked about the idea of man being religious and believing the fact that God put that in us to seek out the Creator. Conscience. Now, we can always all appreciate, if you've watched Pinocchio, right, that you can mistrain your conscience and teach yourself that things, when your conscience guides you, that you can be misled into wrong. But the conscience existed within us prior to that. And it's that part of us. Now, yes, we need God's revelation to completely understand what is right and wrong, although I think there's still some innate things that are put into us about right and wrong. I think we could learn some of those things just in the idea of the stories, even from the book of Genesis when we think through them. I find it unique when you hear about the first story between Cain and Abel, and I mentioned that, why did he think it would be wrong to kill his brother? I think he knew that. I think we know that. Do we teach children not to kill other children? Do we do that? Do we talk about that? First of all, you have to teach children what it meant to kill, right? First, so they would know to not do it. But they know they don't want to do that. And you grow up and it's like, well, when they understand life and death, you have to. No, I think the conscience, there's things within it that God created within us that exist. When you start talking about these things, it gets really difficult for atheists to go through. We've touched on a couple of these in this process, but there's just a few questions that they leave here at the end of this chapter, and we're going to run out of time here. But I was going to just mention these particular questions that you have to answer when it comes to the idea of morality for these individuals. And there's absolutely no way an atheist can answer any of these or touch on these. They might as well just walk away because they have no way to get with this. When you start talking, you say, well, whence, not a word we often use, but whence is the origin? What is the origin of morality? And we could obviously spend some time thinking about what the origin of morality is. Without God, a big bang, an explosion, what makes right and wrong out of an explosion? Second question, what is the motivation for morality? Okay? Very interesting if you start thinking about just the evolutionary process and think, well, we've evolved enough that we now think about right and wrong. Okay? Animals don't think about right and wrong. There aren't lions that are up at night because they killed an antelope. It just doesn't happen. They don't have sleep anxiety because of it. They sleep well because their bellies are full and they ate that antelope. So they don't have a right and wrong because they weren't given that type of a conscience to think this is wrong. They were given an innate ability and desire to kill those things they need to sustain their life. So the question would be that that particular question is to the motivation behind what morality is. Then how is morality defined? Well, atheists, they're not going to have any way to define morality. If we evolved from something, just because we have more cells, what makes one thing right, one thing wrong, what makes this right, that wrong? There is no no place to find the definition for morality. And what would be interesting is they use these types of quotes, and you read these things, they would say that there's things that would be situational. You've heard of situational ethics? This situation is going to be right and wrong. Well, if it could be right in this situation and wrong in another situation, is the actual act right or wrong? Well, they can't define that because they have no basis for that. Again, that's one of the great things about Revelation. We wouldn't know right and wrong either without the revelation of God. And we're appreciative to God for that. Does morality have an ultimate consequence? At the end of the day, you could say, okay, we know the Apostle Paul, and we also know of Adolf Hitler. Okay? Without morality, at the end of time, it doesn't matter what either one of them did, the way they lived their life. You'd be standing over here an atheist, and all they'd have to say is, yeah, they lived their lives completely differently, but did it matter? They'd have to say, no, it really didn't matter how they lived their life. Yeah, there was what they'd say, well, they were, and they'd start bringing up things. Well, he did this, Hitler, and he did. Well, when did that matter? Because they're just other evolved things. And so, again, atheists are going to have great challenge with all of these particular questions regarding that. And so morality is one of those things we can appreciate is something that was put in us from God, but explained by the revelation of Him so that we can understand the depths and understand what it is, and then the consequences for the life that we live here on earth. All right, I've rushed through that last section on morality, I know, because we got down to the end of our time, and we're 2 minutes over that. So hope this has been beneficial to you think through. Again, this is a book I think is still available on Apologetics Press that I've been using called Surveying the Evidence. So it's a good resource, but they've got numerous other books relating to apologetics matters like this. So, again, Walter's going to be picking up on Sunday to teach the next 2 sessions, and he's going to stay in this general area of apologetics, but I don't know exactly what he's going to be covering. But we are dismissed. Hope everybody has a good night. Thank you for your participation.
I catch him real quick. I catch him real quick. With you. Jamie? Did you ever catch
Drive out Saturday afternoon. Head out. So we can see Chester, how are you tonight? Arkansas. My dad's going to have open heart surgery on Monday, so we're going to go out and see him and be with my mom while he's going through that surgery. Okay. So Jen and I will be out of town on Sunday.
So y'all are they Christians too?
Yes. My father was an elder here for about 20 years. He's finishing up his career and retired, and he moved out to Arkansas at a slower pace. Smaller city. My sister lives out there and stuff, so he's retired out there. They're making, he actually served
What church?
It's Westside Church of Christ in Surston, Arkansas.
Is that big?
Oh yeah, they've got about 600 or 700 members out there.
They say you know just to go to India and wheelchair donate to church and somebody
wheelchair you brought?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Appreciate that.
so y'all can use and if I ever need it back, I'll let y'all know.
Okay. Good. Yeah, have those around. We've had it from time to need. So that's how we are.
I'm fine. How are you?
Good.
This is something fun.
Well, they probably able to resent in Texas because we know the way this works is we put all the addresses in and send them with a company that printed the picture and they actually did the mailing. That's why it's printed on here somewhere, and so that was shipped from Texas, and they just send it directly for us, which is an easier way to do it than putting your own, making your own labels and stamping all of the cards. So we did, but yeah, we hadn't updated that address to the remote address. Right, so we'll get that corrected. So it's good.
We had a journey.
We had a journey, but yeah, well, it's crazy that too, when it forwarded, that it got forwarded, but it took 2 months to get there.
Yeah, it's good. Is it ever go that big? We could ever go that big?
Did we ever grow that big here?
What's most people in
Oh, well, this auditorium would be, really too big if we got 600. I mean, it wouldn't be big enough if we had 600 people all the time. So we would have to consider a much bigger auditorium. This area has just been transitional, the part of Atlanta that it's in, that so many people move around Atlanta and get kind of far away for traffic reasons and things like that. So we've been a little larger at times in the past and stuff, so it kind of changes at times. So, we'll use the highest we have. We're regularly over like 350 at some point, probably on Sunday mornings.
I was going to say, at some point, I can't say, at any rate, the attendance was larger. I think you said 350.
It's one of those things too. You've always got some members that may not always attend as regularly. If you had them all here, we could have had easily 400. And even now, you could probably push the number up 50 every week. You've got everybody here. Some people are in and out a little bit more as frequently. Yeah, I mean, you could grow bigger and bigger. That's our desire. It's just one of those things that's sad. The world and our hearts are not always attuned to, not that they're not attuned to religion, they're just not always attuned to the truth. They want to stop short of the truth because it's a little more challenging to have the whole truth because it limits the way they have to use it.
Why do you have mega churches that when churches become mega churches, why don't they everyone meet up with us and they start bringing this to the field?
Well, I mean, yes, so there's things like that. The instruments are going to be a part of it. These mega churches have a lot of different motivations behind them. The reasons that they come about. They're not always, they use God as a part of that, but that's not their central thing. They use it kind of as a thing to hide behind. Their central purpose a lot of times is just to make people feel happy about themselves, even when they're not living right.
I would add too. I think a lot of those places, those mega churches, it's entertainment.
Oh, it's absolutely entertainment, but it's entertainment that makes them feel good about themselves. They know the life that they're living is not exactly right, but then they come on Sunday morning and they tell you that God will forgive you or whatever, and they don't really put restrictions on them. They let them go out and live however they want during the week, which isn't, the way God wants things. And so you can have a religion like that where you think you're going to be fine and you're going to go to heaven and go out and live however you want. That's much more appealing to people. This is, yes, God's got restrictions. He's got some, we're supposed to be walking worthy of the sacrifice. He forgives us for our sins. We ought to be working and serving for Him.
This way.
Not a lot of people that want to do that, sadly.
Have you ever read a book by Gary Holloway about leading God's people? About the history of the Christian church and churches of Christ?
No, I'm not familiar with that particular church.
What are you talking about Campbell?
Yeah, we go. Yeah, you would think you could go out, and I know people have tried to go and
want me to
Yeah, I can go back and.
Yeah, I'll put it back in.
Yeah, thank you. You would think you could take people back, the kind of the restoration movement, or you could go to people like whether they're Baptists or Methodists and ask them about salvation. And you could think you could just with the Bible sit down with preachers that are preaching wrong with the Bible, but sadly it's kind of like we mentioned with these evolutionists. They have such a bias. They have a bias and a support structure from their denomination that they don't want to just look at the Bible the way it is and teach what it says, because so many of them are going to say we're going to pray that's not in the Bible, and instead of with the true steps of salvation, which is kind of crazy. But these men, they're men as well, and they just you gotta go home because we gotta go to school tomorrow. Everybody's gotta go home too. We gotta go check on Hay-Hays at our house.
Have you ever heard of? But you know what used to be called disciples of Christ?
Well, I mean, there's other terms, that the church could be called. I mean, we have Church of Christ out there, but again, that just means it's Christ's church. So you could have on the sign, it could say Christ Church, because all you're trying to do is identify that this is Christ's church. So you could call it the Lord's church. To me, we could be called disciples of Christ as individuals, but it wouldn't be what we want on the sign out there, because we are disciples of Christ, but what we're trying to indicate that this is Christ's church, and that's what we're trying to be, is Christ's church, and want to give Him the honor and glory, not really about us. Yes, we're followers, but so that's why what we put on the sign is just to help people understand that this is the Lord's church. So a lot of times when I'm talking to people, I don't use Church of Christ. I always refer to it as the Lord's church, just because it seems a little more understanding that it's just all we're saying is that the Lord's church, or the church of the New Testament, or the church of the Bible. There's nothing wrong with the term disciples of Christ. When you talk about, you can say, good morning, good to see all you disciples of Christ, referring to the audience that's here on a Sunday morning. There's nothing wrong with that, because it just means follower. So, not really wrong with the terminology, but it's just not what you want to call Christ's church. It's His church, so it's just Christ's church. It makes sense. Just call it by His name, not adding anything to it. The only reason we add something like Avondale is just to tell us what community we're in, or something we'll name it by the street they're on. We could easily be called Memorial Drive Church of Christ because we're on Memorial Drive. It's just more about knowing the location. Just like we refer to the churches in the New Testament, the church at Corinth. It's the Church of Christ, but you just say at Corinth so we know which one locality that you're talking about. So it's just more location. Well, I gotta hook up with my family and head on home. It's already getting late.
All right.
Good to see you tonight, Chester. All right.
That's what I was reading about. We're really nice people that it used to be disciples of Christ in 1906, something like that.
Well, and again, depending on the history and stuff that you read from, some places might have been called that. The Christian church, is another one that's pretty close to the Church of Christ, but they brought in music and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of history, and some of them, again, it really comes down to hearts of people that want, if you can go back to God is the authority and let things go, that we leave it with what God has told us that He wants us to do, it's going to work out much better. So. All right, Chester, I'm going to head out. It's right here behind me.
Come get the mic. We're going to be locking the door.
Yeah. You have a good night, Philip, too.
We're going to get the stuff. We're going to be locking that door. Interesting.